Blood, pain, and screams. That's how we all imagine Vikings, right? They were brute, terrifying, and worst of all, merciless. In this video, let's tell you what happened to you if you were an opponent of the Vikings. Let's begin. The fire burning alive was one of the most brutal execution methods used by the Vikings. It served two main purposes: punishment for enemies and sacrificial offerings to the gods. Some victims were burned inside longhouses, while others were placed in wooden ships set on fire as part of ritual sacrifices. Historical sources confirm that burning alive was used as a revenge tactic. The Heimskringla, written by Snorri Sturluson, describes how King Harald Fairhair burned his enemies inside their homes after they refused to submit. Another account tells of Jarl Eureka setting a hall on fire to kill King Harald Bluetooth's men. These acts were not only about execution, but also about instilling fear. Vikings also used ship burials combined with fire. The famous Oseberg ship burial in Norway suggests that an important Viking woman was laid to rest in a sacrificial ceremony, possibly with a slave or companion burned alongside her. The Arab traveller Ibn Fadlan witnessed a Viking chieftain's funeral where a slave girl was burned alive to accompany her master into the afterlife. This confirms that fire was a key element in Viking death rituals. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts. Excavations in Denmark and Sweden have uncovered remains of charred bones, indicating ritual burnings. Fire was believed to help the soul transition to the next world, making burning both a punishment and a religious act. Unlike the blood eagle, burning alive is a proven Viking practice with multiple sources confirming its use. Whether used to punish enemies or honor the gods, fire played a significant role in Viking executions. Would you have preferred a quick death, or would you have fought to avoid the flames? But fire wasn't always the weapon of choice. The Vikings believed in letting nature decide one's fate, ensuring death came in the most agonizing way possible. Few punishments were as horrifying as the next one. The blood eagle. This is one of the most terrifying execution methods linked to the Vikings. According to Norse sagas, it was used to punish traitors and enemies of great importance. The process involved cutting open the victim's back, breaking the ribs from the spine, and pulling out the lungs to resemble wings. Some stories claim that salt was rubbed into the wounds to prolong suffering. It was said to be a sacrifice to Odin, ensuring the victim's soul went straight to the gods. The most famous case is the execution of King Ella of Northumbria, who allegedly suffered the blood eagle at the hands of Ragnar Lodbrok's sons. Other accounts mention Viking warriors like Halfdan Longleg, who supposedly met the same fate. These stories appear in medieval sources such as the Orkneyinga saga and Heimskringla. But was the blood eagle real? Many historians believe it may have been exaggerated or even a misunderstanding of poetic descriptions. The sagas that describe it were written centuries after the Viking Age, and there is no physical evidence confirming that it was ever performed. Some researchers argue that the blood eagle might have been a symbolic reference to brutal execution rather than an actual practice. Modern studies suggest that while the method is technically possible, the victim would have died from shock or blood loss long before the lungs could be pulled out. This contradicts saga descriptions of prolonged suffering. Despite the debate, the blood eagle remains one of the most chilling legends from Viking history. Whether fact or fiction, it helped build the Vikings' reputation as ruthless warriors. Would you have dared to challenge them, knowing this fate awaited their enemies? The blood eagle was terrifying, but not all Viking executions were about slow, excruciating pain. Some were meant as offerings to the gods, ensuring divine favor in war and life. Let's learn about one such practice. Hanging from a tree. Hanging was a common Viking execution and sacrificial method deeply connected to their beliefs in Odin, the god of war and wisdom. According to Norse mythology, Odin sacrificed himself by hanging on the great tree Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights to gain wisdom. This act influenced Viking rituals, where victims were hanged as offerings to the gods. Evidence of these practices appears in sagas and historical accounts. The Ynglinga saga describes how King Domalde was hanged as a sacrifice to restore prosperity during a famine. Other texts mention prisoners of war, criminals, and slaves being sacrificed in a similar way. These executions were seen as a way to appease the gods and ensure victory in battle. Archaeological evidence also supports this. The site of Gamla Uppsala in Sweden, an ancient Viking religious centre, contained remains suggesting ritual hangings. Viking-era bog bodies, such as the Tolland Man found in Denmark, also indicate that hanging may have been part of sacrificial rituals. Apart from religious sacrifices, hanging was also used as punishment for serious crimes. The Gragas, Iceland's early law code, prescribes hanging for traitors, murderers, and thieves. This suggests that the Vikings viewed hanging not only as a sacred act, but also as an effective form of execution. Unlike the blood eagle, hanging from a tree is well documented and widely accepted by historians as an authentic Viking practice. It was both a legal execution and a religious offering, reinforcing the strong connection between law, faith, and death in Viking society. Hanging was a fate many feared, but it wasn't the only execution deeply tied to Viking rituals and beliefs. Sometimes, the flames themselves became the executioner, reducing victims to ashes in both punishment and sacrifice. The Pit of Snakes. Scared of reptiles? Well, the Pit of Snakes is one of the most famous Viking execution methods, largely due to the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok. According to Norse sagas, Ragnar was captured by King Ella of Northumbria, who threw him into a pit filled with venomous snakes. This execution was meant to be slow and agonizing, as the snakes repeatedly bit and poisoned him until he died. Before his death, Ragnar is said to have uttered his famous last words, foretelling his son's revenge. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle does not mention the snake pit, but the saga of Ragnar Lodbrok and Gesta Danorum describe this execution in detail. While sagas often contain dramatic storytelling, they are based on real events and traditions. Vikings did encounter venomous snakes, especially in Europe and the Middle East, making it possible that such executions occurred. Snake pits were not exclusive to Vikings. Other cultures, including the Romans and Germanic tribes, used them for execution. The idea of using nature's deadliest creatures as punishment aligns with Viking beliefs in harsh justice and symbolic retribution. However, there is no direct archaeological evidence proving that the Vikings frequently used snake pits for execution. Unlike burning or hanging, which have physical remains and written laws confirming their use, the snake pit appears mainly in saga literature. This makes it difficult to determine whether it was a common Viking practice or a legendary embellishment. Despite this, the snake pit remains one of the most feared Viking punishments in history. Whether real or exaggerated, the idea of being thrown into a pit of writhing vipers was enough to terrify Viking enemies. While enemies faced brutal ends, not all Viking executions were about revenge. Some were part of rituals that honored the gods, ensuring that even in death, loyalty was tested. One of the most disturbing? Slave sacrifice. Slavery was a crucial part of Viking society, and slaves were sometimes sacrificed in religious ceremonies or funerals. Unlike common executions, these sacrifices were meant to serve the gods or accompany their masters into the afterlife. One of the most famous accounts comes from the Arab traveller Ibn Fadlan, who witnessed a Viking chieftain's funeral among the Rus Vikings in the 10th century. According to his writings, a female slave was chosen to be sacrificed. She was forced to drink alcohol, symbolizing her transition to the afterlife, before being strangled and stabbed. Her body was then burned with her master on a funeral ship. Archaeological evidence supports this practice. The Oseberg ship burial in Norway contained the remains of 2 women, one of whom may have been a sacrificed slave or servant. Other burial sites in Denmark and Sweden show signs of ritual killings, with beheaded or bound skeletons suggesting sacrifices. Some victims appear to have been killed and buried with weapons, jewelry, or their masters. Not all sacrifices were related to funerals. Some were offerings to Odin, the god of war and wisdom. The Ynglinga saga describes how Vikings hanged people in sacred groves as gifts to the gods. Some captives may have also been drowned or buried alive in religious rituals. Unlike mythical Viking punishments like the blood eagle, slave sacrifice is a confirmed historical practice. It was a brutal part of Viking culture, where human life was sometimes seen as a price for divine favor. The Vikings ruled with brutality and belief, ensuring their enemies met terrifying fates. Whether through ritual sacrifice or merciless punishment, their executions were designed to instill fear and honor their gods. These methods shaped their legacy as ruthless warriors. Which one do you think was the most horrifying? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.